Alright, you've heard from me about my bold predictions, so let's hear from you. And some of your predictions are pretty bold. So let's, like with mine, go through 15 of them. Last week, I did a video regarding 15 of my boldest predictions, a sort of tradition for the channel, and now it's your turn. I looked through the community post I shouted out last week, and you've been busy with around 370 comments, so if you're not already, do subscribe to the channel to find out if your predictions, the most popular out of all of the comments, actually came true, or they turned out, just like probably most of mine, to be absolute bonkers whatever. And by the way, I saw some people putting 2 predictions in your post. Well, as Oscar Piastri would say, cheeky. So let's start off with the most popular bold prediction. Bottas outscores Hamilton. Bottas scoring more than Hamilton needs 2 things to happen. Cadillac to absolutely nail next year's reset, well, this year's reset, and Ferrari to be even messier. Yeah, Bottas outscoring Hamilton in a Mercedes isn't that far-fetched. Between a Cadillac and Ferrari, I know that Cadillac is a customer of Ferrari, and actually, that's probably a very valid point as to why that probably will never happen. And I really do think that he will probably be up there amongst the top 6. Whether or not he'll be closer to 3rd or 2nd, or even going for a title hunt, or indeed where he was in 2025, 6th out of 6, remains to be seen. But I don't really see Bottas getting anywhere near that. Bottas clearly is a popular figure. I mean, look at all of the social media he's doing, including the First We Feast video with Checo. He is very much hot property. So this, equally, is hot property. Outscoring Hamilton is just absolutely wild. So I guess in a way, I would say the spanner would be required, but for the purposes of this video, it's a bold take. It's a bold prediction. In second, with 69 likes, nice, is Ferrari will be forced into a completely new driver lineup for 2027. Now here, forced would imply chaos. Performance collapses, politics getting the better of Ferrari, no surprises there, contracts absolutely exploding, maybe even a shock retirement. And actually, it's something that I sort of think would happen. I talked about it in my main predictions video. For that to happen would mean an existential crisis that Ferrari has not seen since probably the early 80s. This would be absolutely insane. If Lewis Hamilton was just to pack it in because he'd had enough of Ferrari supposedly resisting every single call he's been trying to make, and then Charles Leclerc just thinking, I can't wait around anymore for you to get good in making a title contender, I need to go somewhere else, everyone's thinking Aston Martin, if this were to happen, Ferrari would have to completely change itself. Include Oliver Behrman in their future campaigns, which is not a bad shout given his really good rookie year, and then maybe if F2 comes a knock-in, with Rafa Kamara. He would have the super license points required in order to compete, and he is very much a darling of the Ferrari Academy. It would be a case of investing in young talent that they procured themselves, instead of being able to tempt others from other teams, because if Ferrari has a stinker of a year, do you think they'll be able to recruit people from other teams because the Ferrari allure is just as potent? No, it would be completely impotent. This is not out of the realms of possibility. It's very exciting, it's very shocking, but maybe this might be for the best for Ferrari if they really drop the ball in the coming season. The next one, and I'm going to lump this in for a twofer because there was a 27 like post and a 21 like post, so totally 48, Williams outscore Ferrari. Williams were pretty solid last year with Albon and Sainz, and Ferrari, yeah, they scored way more points overall, but they didn't look nearly as stable doing so. And many folks are touting Williams to probably come out of the gate with the most developed 2026 car out there. Sort of like what we saw with Haas, them having the most developed 22 car, but then really not doing anything with it, either due to a lack of resources, or their upgrade path was just absolutely dismal. Williams outscoring Ferrari isn't that crazy if they absolutely get it nailed on the head, with either Albon or Sainz knocking on the door of a title contention, or at least bagging one win on merit. That was a bold prediction of mine. Do I think that will even happen? It remains to be said. If I were putting my normal cap on, I would say that would be a bit of a tall order, but I like to be bold in my main video, and clearly you lot are there. If they don't outscore Ferrari, they could easily be a lot closer in the standings than they were in 2025, when there was about a 250 or 300 point gap. I can't quite remember, but there was certainly a big divide between 5th and 4th. That gap will either stand to be closer, and Williams remain 5th, or Williams are the ones to be a front-runner newcomer, or at least a returnee based on their legacy, and Ferrari might be the most likely candidate to fall out of the front-running pack. We'll just have to wait and see. And the Williams train continues with the 4th highest bold prediction with 35 likes, a Williams win and podiums for most of the season for both Carlos and Alex, and that is basically just saying what I've already been saying, that Williams will become a new dominant front-runner. Even in a regulation shake-up, podiums most races for both cars is championship tier consistency. I understand and have complete faith in James Vowles doing the deed and coming up with a really spicy car, but if Williams were able to do that, and this is going against their own predictions of 2028 as to the year when they'll actually be firing on all cylinders, this would be a huge uptick in performance and at a much quicker time. But then again, we weren't really expecting anything in 2025, neither were Williams. They didn't really care where they were going to be. Carlos Sainz was talking about maybe P7s and P8s being the best they could possibly hope for. What are they going to do? Score a huge amount of points, the most since 2016, and then also have 2 podiums for their trouble, which means that now Williams can no longer have to say that their last podium came from Lance Stroll. It's not completely impossible. Give those 2 the right car, the strategy continues to improve, and their operations are not as shaky as they were and have been the last few years, then it could happen. It's a pretty bold statement for them to rock it up that much, but we've seen regulation changes where this has happened before, so not an impossibility. The next one has 34 likes. One race will have 10 or more retirements due to chaos or reliability. Yeah, this is the kind of prediction that feels wild until you remember new rules years often bring weird reliability spikes. Not to mention, a wet race can turn into a survival show. May I remind you what happened in 2019? I come from a collective of F1 fans that remember the days when the remaining classified cars would get into the single figures. And for anyone watching Formula 1 before that, that was pretty much commonplace with reliability. Oh, pish posh. Oh no, don't worry about reliability. Just go stonkingly fast, old boy. Thankfully, Jack Brabham saw through that and managed to win many races because of thinking, oh hey, maybe I should probably think about finishing the race there. So 10 DNFs is a pretty reasonable shout. That would mean 12 classified finishes, meaning that pretty much everyone would end up scoring points. And if you're one of the 2 drivers that didn't score points that time, you'd just be thinking, what have I got to do here? I don't really think it's that bold. I think it's quite possible because this is the brand new regulations coming in and everyone's got a lot of unknowns here. This is the most comprehensive technical and sporting and regulation, financially speaking, change that we've seen, even bigger than 2022 was meant to be. I think the winners of 2026 will be the team and drivers that face the least amount of surprises. Prediction 6 comes with 26 likes. Red Bull's second seat gets tamed by Isaac Hadjar. Isaac Hadjar is in the big seat now with Verstappen for next year, and tamed might mean not destroyed weekly. That is achievable if he qualifies well and he stays calm and learns quickly. And quite frankly, the idea of taming the second seat means that he won't be out on his arse at the end of the year. But given the fact that Christian Horner is no longer there, Helmut Marko isn't there, the Red Bull Junior program has essentially been gutted to now just be consisting of 8 people with only 1 in Formula 2. I think there is far less pressure on the likes of Isaac Hadjar to be able to kick on. In fact, Laura Mekies has basically said, hey, we like what you're doing. When you're with the big team, just keep it up. Keep going, keep developing, keep doing what you do. Especially considering that Max has got a lot of things to be getting on with the likes of Ford, really getting himself entrenched with all of the technical people there. He's not going to care what Hadjar's doing unless he gets in his way, which if he does, he'll explode. But given the fact that Max has been really supportive of teammates and not really considered them to be the problem, I think that Isaac will be just getting on just fine. So him being the one that actually sees the second seat curse being lifted from Milton Keynes, perfectly reasonable. Whether or not he'll end up with a win to his name, well, that really depends on how good the car is. But right now, this prediction, I think it's perfectly solid. Prediction number 7 is that Stroll leaves Aston after the season and joins either Rally or Rallycross. He is still listed at Aston for this year, and his contract is as long as a piece of string, as I've said many times. That rally switch, though, is the spicier part. It's a totally different craft, and not the usual path for an F1 lifer. It has been done before. We have seen Robert Kubica take on rallying, Kimi Raikkonen, Valtteri Bottas, they like a bit of rallying. I still can't forget what Liam Lawson was able to do at Goodwood, trying out a rally car and being within a few tenths of experienced drivers in that field. He would have a really good career in that category. Lawson is really underrated in that regard in terms of adaptability and defense. Just like, wow. But in any case, rallycross? That's a really weird part of the prediction, but this actually sort of ties in as a little bit tamer than my prediction, which if you watch the video, you'll be aware that I'm predicting that Lance Stroll will exit Formula 1 during 2026 and then either be replaced by Jack Crawford or maybe another person to make a sudden career move, but you'll have to watch the video as to exactly who I was predicting. But hey, I can see that this is most of the F1 world just wishing for this to happen, although realistically, it is not likely to happen. And if he were to leave Formula 1, it would most likely be World Endurance, or he might take up tennis. Prediction number 8, and this is actually somewhat mirroring mine with 23 likes, Cadillac gets a podium. Now, new team podiums are rare, but they can happen. And with this full reset in Cadillac's lineup with Bottas and Perez being one of the most experienced, this could happen if the right circumstances occur, like a chaotic race, for example. For them to secure a podium on merit in 2026 would be a bit of a doozy and a huge story for American audiences, considering that this is meant to be the next American team. Bottas and Perez, oh, they'd be sticking around for as long as they possibly can. And this is just something I feel that will be a little bit fanciful. It'll be a feel-good story, no doubt. It's a bold one, and I would agree with you. This would be an absolute bombastic thing to occur, a real good story, and maybe thinking, hey, we could have some variety here. It might not be boring. Fantastic. But we would also need to have a bonkers race attached to it, so that it would mean the Cadillac podium would be just one of many bonkers stories in that particular weekend. Prediction number 9 with 20 likes, Hamilton announces his retirement within the first 5 rounds of the season. Now, early season retirements can happen, but doing it within the flyaway races before we get to Europe, that would be a huge shocker that I don't think even Ferrari could really try and weather. I mean, don't get me wrong, if that were to occur, we would most likely see Oliver Behrman be called up from Haas, and then Haas having to make some sort of frantic bid to try and find somebody to fill in the gap. Maybe Jack Doohan might get the call up since he is technically ready to go. But that is for another video. The point is, though, is that Lewis Hamilton announcing this within the first 5 rounds and just saying, nah, mate, this is not good enough for me, man, I'm calling it a day. He's perfectly within his right to do so. He's proved himself more than enough in Formula 1 to just go about his business and go and do something else. But at the same time, would he really want to be doing that just to quit at the first sign of resistance? I don't really think it's as part of his brand in a way, or even his character. I don't see it happening. If he were to retire, it would be at the end of the year, and he would announce it sometime around Monza, and then we would go from there. But my bold prediction would be that wouldn't happen. That if Charles Leclerc were to leave Ferrari, Lewis would just dig in his heels even more, sensing an opportunity to take control, be the main focus of development, with maybe Oliver Behrman right next to him as his trusty, plucky British sidekick. But yeah, if he were just emotionally checking out of Formula 1 and the car was just not to his taste, this brand new formula, that it wasn't going to appeal to him, then yeah, he has every right to leave, but to leave that soon before development can actually take hold, that would be a crushing blow for Ferrari. I don't think John Elkann would even survive. I think we'd have a brand new chairman. Complete overhaul of the hierarchy of that team, especially considering that the executive branch decided to get themselves involved with the racing team. But okay, done enough rambling. Let's move on to the next one. Prediction 10 with 17 likes. One of the Williams drivers finishes the year in the top 5. Now, I think they mean the Drivers' Championship here. So, getting in the top 5 means that you'd be beating a couple of the usual giants over the full year. But again, with Sainz and Albon, it's not that crazy if Williams build a legit car and the grid tightens, especially considering that they are mentioning about one of the Williams drivers getting into the top 5. Considering that they got both drivers into the top 10 already, with Alex Albon in 8th place and Carlos in 9th, this is not that crazy of a prediction. It's certainly a bold one. It would be a nice advancement forward for them to get to at least 5th place in the championship, but you would require one of those drivers getting 200 points plus. It all remains to be seen as to whether or not Williams built the most developed car and then continue to develop, especially that many of the processes aren't quite fully up to speed yet, and some of the personnel that they've been hiring can't fully activate themselves until the end of this year and then next year. 2028 is still the focus for James Vowles as to when Williams will be really firing on all cylinders, like I mentioned earlier. But, top 5, I think it's not unreasonable to predict that. I didn't think of that. Then prediction 11 with 14 likes, every team gets a podium. And with 11 teams, everyone podiuming is basically a season-long miracle chain. So for every single team to score at least one podium, including Cadillac and Audi, wow. I mean, it's not that crazy since Hülkenberg got his first podium with a Sauber, but if that were to happen, that would be just one feather in the cap of 2026, proving that it might end up being one of the most insane seasons of recent memory. So you've got McLaren, you've got Red Bull, you've got the usual crowd, but then you've got VCAR, but then wait, Isaac Hadjar got a podium. Then you've got Haas, that would mean they would have to get their first podium ever. Quite frankly, them getting a podium and Haas getting their first podium, that would be enough, so I'll have to wait and see that one. Number 12, also with 14 likes, but further down the top comment section, it'll be Ferrari's worst season since 1980. And that is a pretty big statement because that season was so bad, it caused the defending champion Jody Scheckter to reconsider his life choices and retire from the sport, especially considering that Ferrari's modern baseline is still quite high, even when they're not happy. So for us to get a similar situation where Ferrari are down on their luck, it would have to be an even worse campaign than what it was in 2020, where we saw Ferrari fall down to 6th place in the Constructors. That, I thought, was bonkers. But at least with that season, it was understandable given the supposed engine quibbles and conversations they'd had in private with the FIA, and then wouldn't you know it, they went from one of the best engines on the grid to then having one of the worst, as we found out with Alfa Romeo and Haas also suffering, them being Ferrari customers. And that's for another video as to whether or not the SF25, the car of last year, will be even worsely remembered than the SF1000 of 2020. Let me know in the comments whether you'd like me to do that video, because it is a bit of a nice thought experiment. But the point is, though, is that if this were to happen, then it would require Lewis Hamilton or Charles Leclerc to abandon ship, or maybe even both of them. That would be a huge existential blow for the long-term Tifosi. They'll remember and just thinking, Mamma Mia, it's happening all over again. That is certainly bold, but I'm going to say improbable rather than impossible. Number 13. This will be Esteban Ocon's final year in F1, making way for a Toyota-backed driver, also with 14 likes. Toyota is, I think, deepening ties with Haas, and especially with the brand new Toyota Racing statement, and it's openly framed itself as a driver development pipeline, with maybe some influence coming through as early as next season. Yeah, this means that a Toyota-backed driver is totally plausible, but quite frankly, I think that will be most likely replacing Oliver Behrman, who will be most likely either off to Cadillac, in case they need someone there, or maybe even more likely, getting the call up to the main Scuderia team. Instead, I think Ocon will get a contract extension for another 2 years. Since he has a good professional relationship with Io Komatsu, they get on together, they've been able to work together, Ocon's not blown his lid too many times, and when he has, it's been for understandable reasons. And as we saw with Haas last year, Ocon was actually quite agreeable. Yeah, he made himself relatively anonymous, but he was still providing them points. Yeah, they only got to 8th in the Constructors, but they were contending for places up to 6th place. They were in the hunt for it, they just missed out at the last minute. And I know Oliver outscored Esteban, yada yada yada, but there were so many instances when Haas dropped the ball, executionally speaking, in qualifying, which meant that Ocon had to be the butt monkey in terms of tyre strategy. But okay, I'm rambling here. The point is, though, is that I don't really see this happening. I think he's got another 2 years in him at least, with him maybe getting into bed with Toyota, and if he ends up leaving Formula 1, there's always a spot for him in World Endurance with Toyota. Who knows? Prediction 14, again with 14 likes, is about reverse DRS trains. Now this commenter actually elaborates on this a little more, thankfully. Instead of pushing flat out, drivers back off to recharge battery. Cars ahead run out of electric boost, then get swarmed later. Gaps grow on purpose, then collapse flat. The smartest saver, not the closest follower, gets the overtake. And the underlying physics are sort of real here, because next year does bring a lot of electrical energy management, as well as the new overtake mode instead of, well, that little flap. There is going to be a lot going on in the minds of the drivers, and this might mean that the smartest out there will be the ones to be contesting for the championship. I'm not going to be naming names, because that's not what we're here for. But the idea that we might get a similar situation where overtaking will become difficult because you're just going, as in you can't actually convert the overtake into an actual gaining of position, it might be plausible. It just depends on how the drivers get a best read on how to actually implement this particular thing. or whether or not the FIA decides to nobble a particular trait and make it a little bit weaker. For example, when they announced the FIA at a given circuit that the DRS activation point is a little bit further into the straight, meaning that it takes a little bit longer to get up to speed when you can overtake, and therefore it makes overtaking harder, and therefore nobody gets to overtake, which is a little bit of a conundrum. We might get that in a different capacity, but it's also something that we've not really seen in practice, and the drivers have not been able to test for themselves. So it's a little bit of a stretch to think about that, but, again, we'll see. This is a bold prediction, but I think we need to see with some proper evidence with our special eyes. And number 15, Alonso will win the Drivers' World Championship with 13 likes and 3 prayer emojis. It's not logically impossible because next year is a reset with Aston becoming a Honda Works team, and the entire team getting themselves ready with Adrian Newey leading the helm on the daily. That is a pretty big dream team. The only issue is that Alonso has not won a race since 2013, and it would take a huge undertaking from Aston to be able to convert and have one of the best teams and cars on the grid. But if there's any man who can make the best of that situation, it would be, of course, Fernando. Being able to somehow drag last year's car into nearly the top 5, scoring the majority of their points in the second half of the season, that was a pretty bold statement of intent in of itself. And we all know about the promise that he made that if we have a good car next year, I'll retire. As I mentioned in my video, he's just gonna forget he said that. He's not gonna let go of a good thing when he sees it or gets it. It's a glorious prediction and astronomically bold, but I think a very popular one. I would like to see that happen, and I'm quite sure you would like to see that happen, but it surprises me that it's only the 15th most popular prediction on that thread. But anyway, thank you very much for sharing your bold predictions. So if you want to find out whether or not it came true, or the one that you liked came true, subscribe to the channel to find out around about this time next year. In the meantime, take a look at this video right here, or refresh yourself with my bold predictions for the year, to maybe give you inspiration for 2027. Anyway, whatever video it is, I'll see you over there.